The rain fell like shards of cold glass, slicing through the lonely highway as Daniel struggled to keep his old pickup from slipping off the slick asphalt. He had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift, his clothes drenched, his stomach empty, and his heart heavier than ever. The court hearing tomorrow would decide whether he would keep custody of his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, his entire world. But as exhausted as he was, the moment he saw the red SUV parked on the side of the road, hazard lights blinking in desperation, something inside him refused to let him pass. Even though he had nothing, kindness was the only thing he had never lost. Backhand index pointing right. If you believe kindness and second chances can change lives, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It means the world to the channel and keeps stories like this alive. Daniel slowed down and saw a young woman kneeling by the flat tire, her clothes soaked through from the relentless rain. She looked frustrated, frightened, and completely alone. Without hesitation, Daniel pulled over and stepped out into the downpour. His jacket was thin, his shoes nearly worn through, but he approached her with a gentle, reassuring presence. The woman seemed startled at first, glancing up at him with wide eyes, but Daniel only smiled faintly and gestured toward the stuck wrench in her hand. He helped her without saying much. He wasn't the type to talk about himself or seek gratitude. His hands were rough and numb from years of labor, but he worked quickly, shielding her from the cold rain as best he could. The tire was stubborn, the bolts rusted, and the road slippery, but he refused to give up. The woman watched him with growing astonishment, noticing how tired he looked, how the rain clung to his face like weary tears. He didn't complain once. When the tire was finally changed, she expected him to ask for money or at least shelter from the rain, but instead, Daniel simply stepped back, nodded politely, and turned to leave. Something about his quiet humility struck her deeply, but before she could say anything more, he was already walking toward his old truck, limping slightly from an injury he had ignored years ago because he couldn't afford medical care. The woman, drenched and shivering, sat inside her SUV and watched his taillights disappear. She couldn't forget his face, the exhaustion hidden behind kindness, the sadness buried beneath responsibility. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his story. But fate had already tied them together. The next morning, Daniel woke early, nerves twisting painfully in his stomach. Lily had drawn him a picture the night before, 2 stick figures holding hands with a big sun above them. "For luck, Daddy," she had whispered. He tucked the drawing into his pocket as he headed to the courthouse. His entire future depended on what happened inside that room. Daniel had made mistakes in life, not crimes, but failures. He had married young, struggled financially, and after his wife walked out on them, he was left raising Lily on his own. Social services believed he was too poor, too unstable, too worn down to provide what they called a suitable environment. But Daniel had a heart that beat only for his daughter. Every sacrifice, every hardship, every tear, he carried them proudly if it meant Lily would smile. He entered the courtroom with trembling hands, expecting the usual judge he had seen in previous hearings. But when the door opened and the judge walked in, Daniel felt his heart stop cold. It was her. The same woman from the rain. The stranded stranger he had helped without asking for anything in return. Judge Evelyn Hart froze for a moment too, recognizing him instantly. She had spent the entire night thinking about the men who had helped her with such genuine kindness. She had even wondered what kind of life he lived, and now, fate had answered her. Daniel's attorney whispered to him, confused by his shaken expression, but Daniel couldn't take his eyes off her. He feared that his fate was sealed. Judges were supposed to be impartial, and what if she assumed he had known who she was? What if she thought he was manipulating her? Thoughts rushed through him like a storm. But Judge Evelyn's voice, calm and steady, softened when she looked at him. She reviewed the files in front of her, pages filled with struggles, debts, and written evaluations that painted Daniel as a man barely holding on. But she also saw something those papers didn't show, the quiet strength of a father who, even in exhaustion and poverty, couldn't pass a stranger in need. She asked him questions gently, listening not just with her ears, but with her heart. Daniel spoke honestly, explaining how he worked every job he could find, how he cooked Lily's meals, read her bedtime stories, attended her school meetings, and kept every promise he ever made to her. He didn't beg. He didn't plead. He simply spoke as a father who loved his daughter more than his own life. Judge Evelyn felt a heaviness in her chest. She had spent years seeing broken families, selfish parents, and neglected children. But Daniel was different. He was a man quietly drowning but still lifting his daughter above the water. When she finally delivered her decision, her voice softened with emotion she rarely showed on the bench. She granted Daniel full custody. For a moment, Daniel didn't breathe. He stared at her as if he couldn't believe the words were real. When they sank in, tears filled his eyes, tears he had held back for far too long. He whispered a thank you, his voice breaking, but she only offered him a small, knowing nod. She didn't reveal the truth of how they had met. She didn't need to. Compassion didn't require acknowledgement. As Daniel walked out of the courthouse into the warm sunlight with Lily's drawing in his hand, he felt a weight lift from his soul. Lily ran into his arms, laughing, hugging him tightly. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed with gratitude, knowing his kindness on a rainy night had unknowingly saved his future. Backhand index pointing right. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps meaningful stories alive. Speech balloon special request: before the video ends, comment, kindness wins, if you believe good deeds always come back.